Okay, guys, welcome back. So we're going to look at part 2 of the social policy and the family PowerPoint. So again, I'm going to work through it the same way as part 1, but I'm going to focus on the key policy areas and hopefully get through the remainder of the topic. Because a lot of this is stuff that you can work through, but I thought I'd try and guide you through it. So the first thing we're going to start with here is, what do the left and right think about family life? And you can take a couple of minutes, pause the video and discuss this or think about this in terms of what they do for single parent families. How might they view benefits? How do you think they're going to view women in the workplace? What do you think they're going to do about elderly people? What about alternatives to nuclear family? And about cohabitation. Now, when we're kind of thinking about what we've done so far, we know the New Right are generally linked to the Conservatives and their thinking style. So what you might want to think about is, how might the New Right view some of these family types? We know Labour is slightly more leaning towards postmodernism, late modernism. So again, how might they view the changes here? But you will find some answers in your pack. Now, when it comes to the importance of family, both Labour and the Conservatives do think the nuclear family is key. That's one thing they do agree on. They both see the nuclear family as important, strengthening society, and they do talk about this idea of the cereal packet family, like the family you see on the adverts of cereal or Bisto adverts. You know, they're very traditional, mum, dad, kids, all sitting around together, enjoying breakfast or their dinner. That's a cereal packet family, this kind of fictional notion of family life. They see the family as being under threat. Both of them see the family as being under threat from divorce, from lone parent family increases, and outside marriage. So these things do threaten the family. Now, if you think back to what we've done on family diversity, we know the nuclear family is still traditional and quite strong and still the predominant family type, but these things are starting to grow. But they're not replacing the nuclear family, just starting to infringe on how many there are. They also like to think about the wider impacts. So teenage pregnancy, educational failure, welfare dependency, poverty, drug use, crime. And a lot of these have been blamed on the family. A lot of these things have their origins, or are argued to have their origins, in the way the family is working. So a lot of criticisms of the family here. Now, one thing to keep in mind, left and right, they do have a difference. Labour support everyone with children. It isn't just married couples that they're supporting, it's everyone with children. Whereas New Right is traditionally a little bit more stricter. They like the nuclear family, they want to promote and encourage it. So that was all for the top of page 118. Now what we're going to look at as we move forward in the pack, we're going to think about the 4 main areas of social policy. We've got Conservative, New Labour, Coalition, and the Conservative parties. Now one thing I want to show you is, I'm going to kind of move the screen so you can see the board just behind me, is that we are looking at policy, and one of the big differences with policy, and I'm going to move my computer so you can see it, is this timeline here. Now this is a display in 634, and I want to show you this because policy has had a big impact on different elements of society. So you've got family life, you've got education, you've got crime and religion, all influenced by social policy. And what we've also got is the key eras, and if I sort of zoom in and move my laptop closer, you can see here, let's move that way, there we go, the key eras. So Labour, under Blair, has been in power since 97 to 2010. So it was in power for about 13 years. But the rest of that timeline, 1979, right through to where we are currently, I know it finishes at 2017, but we know we then entered the era of Boris. We are still under Conservative and New Right views. And again, this is one of the big things about social policy, that it has a massive influence on the way we work. And it isn't just family and education, it's all avenues of society. And that's why we do talk about the New Right a lot. They're not sociological thinkers, but they've had a big impact. They've affected a lot of what we do. And that's why we bring them into this topic, to study them. So that's obviously a little bit about the policy, thinkers and the eras. Now what we also need to think about is the direct and indirect. So this is at the top of page 118. Now, social policies can directly affect family life. They can be policy designs that directly affect the family and designed to shape the family, affect the family specifically. Or they can be indirect policies. So they're policies that affect the family. They weren't designed to affect the family, but they've had a big impact nonetheless. So universal credit, we mentioned earlier, has created a lot of poverty. Now, the policy wasn't designed to affect family. It wasn't designed to effectively create poverty. It's meant to make the benefit system easier. It's made it worse, but it wasn't designed to do that, we hope. So the indirect effect is led to family poverty. It's led to families having to give up homes and move out of areas, particularly stuff like the bedroom tax affecting families in council properties, and they've had to give up properties to move elsewhere. So it has an indirect effect on the family life, even though that wasn't necessarily the intention. So this is indirect, and we're going to sometimes think about these more so next year, but how policies can specifically affect the family and how the indirect. Another good example would be Equal Pay Act. Equal Pay Act was designed to give men and women equal pay for equal work. Now, the indirect effect was all the changes it's led to in family structures and the role of women. So that wasn't designed as part of the policy, but it happened as a consequence. And that's the difference between a direct and indirect. A lot of the policies we will look at are directly aimed at the family, but there are a few indirect ones, and I'll try and also emphasise those as we go. So, policies before 1979. Before 1979, when Margaret Thatcher came into power, we've got a few social policies that were really big in affecting family life. And you can see them on page 118 to 119 of your pack. I'm just going to flag them up, and we'll look at them. And again, you just need to read and think about the effect it had. So I'm just going to grab my pack. Here it is in my nice sociology folder. So the first one, we've got the Beveridge Report. Now in 1942, the Beveridge Report was introduced, and this introduced our welfare system. The NHS, the welfare state, benefits, all introduced as part of the Beveridge Report. Now this is really good because it changed the way society worked. There was a safety net, a protection for people who experienced poverty, inequality or suffering of some kind. And this was really the start of the welfare system. Now we know current policy either support or dislike the welfare state, the welfare system. So it says, what impact could the introduction of this policy have on the structure of the family? So looking at my notes, it's increased life expectancy. It reduced the infant mortality rate. That's changing structures and creating more beanpole. It's reducing the number of children. The standard of living raised. So we might see, we looked at Will Martin Young and how after industrialisation, symmetrical families grew. The welfare of the home became important. If we were to evaluate the negative impacts of it, we could look at the cost. It's a costly policy. National insurance and welfare, these are all things that cost money. Benefits, New Right don't like them. They talk about welfare state, moral decay, and underclass. And also pensions. We know pensions has become the issue as we have an ageing population. Dependency ratios rise. That impacts on lots of areas like income tax and other avenues there. So that's a really big kind of consequence or criticism we could throw towards these policies. If you look at divorce, that came before 1979. That was 1969 and then was introduced in 1971. That massively changed the family, didn't it? We know that led to more divorces, that led to breakdown of family structures, that led to more single-parent families, single-person households, more cohabitation, remarriage. It was a big kickstart to family change. It also changed the role of women, gave women more empowerment, and again, that led to big changes in family life. So again, if we think about the impacts of the introduction of this policy, we know that's led to big changes. We've got equal pay and sex discrimination again. I've mentioned already so far, but this gave women an opportunity to escape the home. Women were able to get out of the home, get out of the family, get a job, be self-sufficient. They didn't need to rely on a husband to support them or pay their way. So this was really key for changing the role of women. We know that's had an impact on domestic division of labour, it's had an impact on family structure, household incomes, number of children people have. It's had impacts on marriage rates and divorce rates and child and fertility rates. So these are all big changes these policies have brought around. So I'm going to pause it there for a second. Okay, there we go, guys. So what we're going to move on to now are the policies since 1979. Now, a lot of this is reading in your pack, so I'm going to fly through it a little bit, give you a little bit of an overview and a gist of what's going on, but I'm not going to break it down into too much depth. I'm going to leave that to you to read, actually. So we'll leave it there for a second. So, if we think about these policies, I'm just going to pause the screen, there we go. So we've got four main eras, and as I mentioned, we've got New Labour, New Right, we've got coalition policies, and we've got the Thatcher era. So we'll start off with the right-wing policies, the right-leaning policies. This is conservative, it's Tory, it's New Right, it's those kind of leaning policies. And as you can see, there are a lot of them because, as we mentioned earlier, based on our big diagram on the board, the Conservatives have had power for such a significant window of time that they've had a big impact on family life in all, and it's not even just family life, it's education, it's crime. They've had an influence on a lot of things. And not all of them have been bad, not all of them have been good, but they've had a big impact nonetheless. So one of the things we're going to flag up is, we've mentioned the ideology, what is the right-wing ideology at the very beginning, that part 1 video, so go back and have a look, but you can read through that. We're going to look at some of the key policies they introduced, and I will just flag them up to you because there's some questions about what they did, and it asks you to think about what happened there. So we've got the Child Support Agency in 1993, where it encouraged fathers to pay for their family. So if a dad or a man left his family, left his partner and his children, he could be shot for them, and that was it. This policy introduced that he was now financially responsible for them. He had to pay for them and support them, nonetheless. So whether he was gone, whether he was with them, living them, you were financially tied. And that led to less pressure on the state, but it also maybe stopped men leaving families and starting new families. It kind of controlled family, kept the family together. And as we know, they like a nuclear family, so maybe it maintained nuclear families. The Health Service Act in 1980 changed the laws in which private medical care was provided. And actually, basically, this kind of led to less publicly funded care homes being available. This kind of changed the way that family care was provided. It shifted a care responsibility for older relatives onto the family. Now, this changed the structure by creating possibly more beanpole families, but also it put the care role on the family. If we know from DOL, with Duncan and Marsden and Ansley and a lot of the feminist thinkers, that women take on that responsibility. So it was kind of reinforcing traditional gender roles by making women take on that care responsibility. Legal aid budget cut. So again, this made it more challenging to be granted a divorce because there was no legal aid and support for you to proceed with an application. Troubled families was designed to target working class families that were deemed to be more likely to be criminal or lead to criminal behaviour. The housing bill, we talked about extending the right to buy. So again, this sold off a lot of council properties. Privatisation, there was less community and council housing available because people could buy it. And that's a good thing for people who want to buy their own home, but the stocks weren't replaced as they would suggest they would be. So that reduced council housing generally, which is something that conservative thinkers have always been quite critical of, council housing. And then we've got welfare changes. And one of the things I wanted to flag up, and I'm going to put it back on the screen, I'll just change the screen here, was austerity. So the Tories putting the cuts into austerity. The key word that we think about, that key C word for the Tories was always cuts. There was cuts to education, to funding, to welfare, and austerity was a national policy. We've been living in 10 years of austerity. Due to the current corona issue, I think we may end up shifting back into austerity as we progress forward, where everything's cut and funding tends to be kind of difficult. So this has had an impact, and we know that the UN rapporteur on poverty looked at the universal credit, looked at austerity measures, and said that it was a deliberate policy by the Conservative government, and it caused unmeasurable suffering and harm. So we know that it's very critically or negatively viewed, and this again, austerity policies are one that we can associate with right-wing thinkers. So it's just one there to flag up. Okay, so we're going to move on to some extension tasks here, which again are in the PowerPoints and reading for you, and then what we're going to move on to next are the left-wing. Okay, here we go, guys, we're back. So, New Labour policies is the next one we're going to look at. So what we've looked at so far has been the Conservative era. As I said, it was quite a long era. So there's a lot of policies spanning all variations of the Conservative government. Now what we're going to flag up are the Labour policies, which are not in the PowerPoint, handily. Nope. So we're going to come back a second and we'll look at that. So in the pack it talks about Labour. Now Labour introduced, again, loads of policies, but some of the flag ones that we can flag up that I think are quite key is paternity rights for men. free childcare for children 2.5 years old, flexible working arrangements for parents and carers, the New Deal, the Winter Fuel Allowance, Children Adoption, Civil Partnership Act. Lots of big policies. I realise same-sex marriage isn't on the Conservative list, but you can add some extra ones in as you go. And I have got a separate document that lists all the policies and the governments they come through. So I will put that onto my Padlet page for you. So if you think about the policy, whether it's pro-diversity or pro-traditional values, you can see there's a bit of a difference. A lot of the Conservatives tend to reinforce traditional values. A lot of the Labour policies tend to promote diversity. And some contemporary changes, so some recent policy changes. Again, the links are in the PowerPoint. I would say have a look at them because there have been some minor changes. So divorce, separation and dissolution bill. So this is going through Parliament at the moment. It seems to have slipped under the corona radar. But there's been some changes. So ultimately, the introduction of no-fault divorces. So this was mentioned in the divorce PowerPoint. But again, it could be helpful for looking at speeding up the divorce process. The Equality Act, big changes here. So we know, I think it was around Christmas time, being vegan was added to the list of protected characteristics. The current discussion of Black Lives Matter has highlighted maybe the failings of this inequality prevention, or the Equality Act, and how it's meant to prevent inequality and isn't doing it. And then pension age for women is due to rise. Now we know pension age has been going up. We know for most generations, particularly your generation, my generation, at the moment it's standing that pension retirement age could be 70, but at the moment women's pension age has gone up. So again, we've got some changes to policy here, and this is all for the bottom of page 121. You've got some extended reading, so again, some summaries there that will help with that, what's going on with the policy. And lastly, what would the perspectives say? This is page 122. Now, in your table, you've got, in your pack on page 122, you've got a table. You've got 5 key social policies, and there's some gaps really for you to fill in. So it asks you to fill in whether you think the policy would have a positive or negative view of social policy, of government policy. What do they say? Can you think of examples, and can you provide some form of criticism? Now, I'm going to leave that to you to have a go at. I'm not going to do it in this video because the video is running quite long. But what I will do on Friday, as part of my Padlet Q&A and as part of the discussion, is I'll go through the answers and I'll put those on the Padlet page. I know there's also, from reviews with you, there's some discussion that you'd like to do Zoom discussions and Zoom lessons. So I am looking into that, and we will potentially have some of those in the future. As I say, anyway, if this has been helpful, if you liked this format, the formal taught lesson, I will try and do a couple more. Give it a like if you do. Email me, let me know if that's the case. If you'd rather go back to my old style, just a PowerPoint and talk it through, again, give me some feedback. Let me know. I'm happy to do whatever you find the most useful. So thanks for watching, and take care.